It is a world of heroes, swords, and magic. The continent of heroes. At this very moment, there is a war of incredible proportions taking place here involving all nations, races, and species of living beings. This war was started by a demon queen, hoping to destroy all living beings and conquer the entire world, launching their invasion by surprise and with incredible power. The demon army, supported by the power of their queen, was so strong that no one could stop their attacks. They passed through the empires of various races and creatures like a knife through butter, leaving behind only death, ruins, and smoke from burned cities. Mighty warriors, mages, and heroes of various races tried to stop them, but their strength was miserable compared to the demon queen. Very soon, only the human race survived and continued to resist, no matter what. So the demon queen gathered her army of horrible and repulsive creatures, demons, for the last battle that separated her from dominating this world. But the human empire, due to constant internal quarrels and rebellions, was not fully prepared for the last battle. So after the first defeats, their empire crumbled, just like their defense. They helplessly surrendered, forgetting their fallen heroes who stood in their defense. As soon as the human empire fell, the demon queen, by the way, her name was Elizabeth, proclaimed herself as the sole and undisputed ruler of this world. Having covered the whole world with her ominous shadow, she did not want to stop and continue to cherish her evil plans known only to her. Meanwhile, the capital of the human empire is being defeated by an army of demons, surrounded by the ruins of the once incredible palace and the bodies of the last defenders of this citadel. The High Mage looked at the ruins in despair in the presence of the prince in the throne room. The High Magician Barrow began to make his last speech, in which he assured that in the future, a hero would surely appear who would defeat and destroy the demon Queen Elizabeth, as it was described in ancient legends. He was putting all the despair and rage that he was feeling at what he was seeing on him into it. However, suddenly, he fell to the ground from the prince's blow, taken by surprise by this betrayal. He had no time to do anything. He could only guess at the prince's motives and goals. Prince Malfoy leaned over the defeated teacher and mentor with a seemingly good-natured face, but his words were pure poison. He said that he should take Her Majesty's orders seriously and that no one was interested in his opinion at all. He was only given orders that he should immediately obey. The Supreme Magus could not even move and only lay helplessly at the traitor's feet. Gathering the remnants of his strength, he shouted in his face everything he thought about him, the traitor of the human race. How he regretted that he had not seen this in him earlier and mistakenly hoped to raise him into the hero promised in ancient legends who would save them from demons. Hearing his words, the prince went mad with rage, and unable to contain his anger, was going to finish the job he had started. The rage and hatred that filled him released his true demonic nature, and when he was about to end it all with words of contempt for his teacher and his father who had long since died, a voice rang out, a voice of such power that the prince instantly stopped a moment before the end. It was Elizabeth herself. She had other goals for him, and death would have been too easy for him to participate in. The prince was forced to stop at an inch from his goal, and despite all his desire, he could not finish what he had started. The order of his mistress was so strong. Elizabeth wanted to know more about this prophecy. She wondered if it was really possible that in the future, one of these weak and insignificant people would be able to challenge her. It should have been interesting and fun after all these years of war. She had never met a single opponent worthy of her. However, she did not show it outwardly. She just said with contempt, "Worthless man, you better explain what you mean. Otherwise, she knows 1,000 ways to make a person suffer a fate worse than death." And looking into those red eyes, there was no doubt about it. Then the frightened magician began to shout that the prophecy said that the promised hero must come, and only he could pull the holy sword out of the stone, and the day he pulls the sword out, the power of demons over people will come to an end. This holy sword is stuck in a stone platform in the main hall. But then he stopped and assured her that he would never tell her again and he would never betray the human race. But it turned out that just one look from Elizabeth was enough for him to give her all the information she needed. And in a moment, the platform with the sword emerged from the secret hiding place. It was the holy sword Alpha or the First, the sword of myths and legends, which defeated countless enemies. Looking at it, Elizabeth wondered if this legend was true, and if the one who would draw it would really have the power and the right to challenge her, or maybe it was just another nonsense from pathetic people. However, when she touched the hilt of the sword, she felt its considerable power and potential. Immersed in her thoughts, she walked toward the throne. Out loud, she said, "How interesting," as she approached the throne with a subtle smile and a twinkle in her eye. She said that she would wait here on the throne until the hero arrived. Thus began the reign of the Demon Queen over all the races and peoples of this world. In the first year, countless guards of demons and traitors stood at the gates of her throne room to keep all her subjects in fear and obedience. But after a year, no one dared to rebel, and the guards became fewer, then even fewer. By the fourth year, only a few guards remained on duty. In the fifth year, no one guarded the queen's throne room at all. Over time, the seemingly cruel rule of the Demon Queen became familiar to the inhabitants of this world, and life and prosperity began to return to cities throughout the continent of heroes. Bustling commerce filled the streets, and creatures of all kinds hurried about their business. Demons, elves, beastmen, gnomes, humans. Everyone had a place in this world under the leadership of the Demon Queen. All past disputes and hostility between the races disappeared. Everyone had equal opportunities, and no one had an advantage over others. Without disputes and claims against each other, everyone was finally able to live in peace and harmony with others. Very quickly, the continent of heroes began to prosper and grow rich under the seemingly ruthless rule of the Demon Queen. Because of this, many began to worry and fear the return of the hero, which could destroy the fragile peace. Therefore, an anti-heroic alliance was formed to prevent the return of the promised hero. Elizabeth sat on the throne of the demonic empire, receiving envoys from different races and from remote corners of her empire. The throne room had been restored and was meant to emphasize the queen's power. The only reason for the guests was a single question. So, is there any news of the promised hero? The first to speak were the representatives of the elves and dwarves. Twiller, the chancellor of the elven race, assured them that they have already engaged all the wood insects in the search, but have found absolutely nothing about the promised hero. Heimerdinger, the chancellor of the dwarf race, said that the dwarves are not very good at collecting information, but they have collected information from all the weapon shops, and according to this research, there is no one suspicious. Then the representative of the humans, Aristotle, spoke smugly and proudly that he believed that even if the promised hero did appear, he would not be able to stand up to all of us. We didn't have to worry about him at all. The next to speak was the demon chancellor, Jim Jem, who could hardly hide his anger and immediately said in response to Aristotle's words that he might not know because he had only recently joined, but that Her Majesty was not afraid of the promised hero. On the contrary, she really wants him to come. He also whispered that the Queen had collected all kinds of ancient books on magic and martial arts to study. At the same time, with a reverent whisper, the Beastman Chancellor added that Her Majesty could destroy the continent of heroes in a matter of seconds. The elf exclaimed that it was all the fault of the idiot Barrows. What prophecy? That's just nonsense. That with Her Majesty, they could just let the promised hero die. At the same time, a noise began to come from the doorway, and a clumsy old man entered the room, shouting, "Cancel the hero! Cancel the hero!" Heimerdinger only tiredly noted that as soon as someone starts talking about Barrow, he immediately appears, as in the famous saying, wearing a loose shirt and pink underpants. Barrowsmith moved around the room shouting loudly. Once a high magician and priest of the human race, he was now the president of the Demon Queen's Fan Club and the Association Against the Promised Hero. Once the pride of the human race and a model of behavior and dignity, he had become a henchman and a petty sycophant of the Demon Queen. Just one snap of Elizabeth's fingers, and incredible magical power is released from her hand. This stream of magic, like a huge hand, picks up the unfortunate magician and priest, knocking the breath out of him and all the junk he brought with him, pulling him to her. Elizabeth asks him with a seemingly sweet smile, "Where is the promised hero?" Scared to death, squeezed by an incredible force, he begins to make a lame excuse that the prophecy might not be accurate or even true at all, especially if the purpose of the prophecy is not at all what was expected, like, for example, her unsurpassed majesty. Their sweet conversation was interrupted by the young prince, who said with all his graciousness that the old priest was right, that it was a great insult to believe in this stupid prophecy and apply it to her majesty. This unfortunate priest had recently found something that allowed him to say that, but before the prince could finish, he received a powerful slap from the queen that knocked him out. She didn't even look in his direction and just threw him over her shoulder with contempt. "Get lost, you bum." As soon as he came to his senses, he could only say that he completely agreed with this and realized his pitifulness. The irritated queen called the priest a pile of garbage and threw him across the hall into the wall with a distinctive sound. He crashed into it halfway through his body, leaving only the edge of his robe and ridiculous pink underwear outside. Unexpected fate for such a gesture. Elizabeth, with a determined expression on her face and straightening up to her full height, began to say that she was the ruler of everything and had reached the top of this world. She held the power of the whole world in her hands. She is waiting for a legendary hero who will be able to challenge her and will finally be to entertain her, and then he will be just a stepping stone to her even greater glory. She studied all the ancient magic books of the hero continent and, after endless attempts, was able to create doomsday magic to be ready for the hero's test. She began to approach the sword she had been contemplating for the past 15 years. The sword, like Excalibur, was illuminated by the rays of the sun, exquisitely decorated with gold and precious stones. The queen continued to approach the sword, wondering why the hero was nowhere to be seen. She continued to stare at the sword with concentration, and there it was, at arm's length, so shiny and beautiful, and at the same time powerful and deadly. So, since the hero does not go to Elizabeth, she will come to him. She took the hilt of the sword with a stone expression full of determination that her subjects had not seen for a long time. As soon as everyone in the room realized what their queen was going to do, they were filled with fear and bewilderment. They all wondered how she dared to do this. They immediately started shouting at her to stop, but their opinion was worthless to her. So she gripped the hilt of her sword with all her strength and tenacity and, with the words, "I am coming to you," she began to pull it. The whole hall was filled with flashes of energy coming from the queen, but even with such power, she could not do it all at once. But she continued to pull with all the strength she had. Sweat began to drip down her terrible and beautiful face. The expression of maximum tension was frozen on her face. It was a scary and dangerous sight. The wind and lightning of pure energy began to demolish everything around. None of those present in the throne room could stand on their feet, and only the timely reaction of the demon chancellor saved the others from danger. He created magical shields that protected everyone else, except for the talentless priest, who was flying around the hall with a part of the wall. There was no limit to their amazement. Would the demon queen pull out the holy sword? A whirlwind of incredible energy pierced the ceiling of the palace like paper and flew into the sky. What could have caused this? Finally, the demon queen drew the holy sword. When the smoke cleared, Elizabeth appeared before everyone, sword in hand. With a mockery, she asked, "Who said that only a legendary hero could pull out this sword?" She was about to throw it away as another piece of trash when suddenly images of the countryside began to appear before her eyes. Mountains, a valley, and then a lonely house. It was not very clear, but it was enough for her to realize where the legendary promised hero was hiding. With the satisfied smile of a predator who has stalked its prey, Elizabeth said, "Yes, this is where you are hiding." Raising her hand, she began to prepare a spell of displacement, and now, enveloped in the glow of symbols and words in an ancient and long-forgotten language, she was going to arrive immediately at that unfortunate hero. The sycophantic prince tried to go with the queen, asking her to allow him to continue serving her, and when he almost reached her, a puff of smoke, the queen disappeared, leaving only one bright red hair in his hand. He could only breathe out, "My teacher Elizabeth," and he remained standing there, confused, with his hand outstretched. Meanwhile, in the village of newcomers, in a valley among the impregnable mountains, somewhere on the outskirts of the continent of heroes, a young peasant is working hard in the field under the scorching sun. Even a large straw hat does not help him escape the heat, and he is forced to wipe the sweat from his face with a handkerchief. This is the legendary hero. He works quietly in the field and is completely satisfied with his life. He does not even realize what fate awaits him ahead. Let's take a closer look at his story. It turns out that he is not from this world. His name is Li Ping, and he was an ordinary office worker. He lived an ordinary and boring life, didn't like to play games or watch anime. His only pleasure was watching his favorite short videos on his way to work on public transportation. These were short videos about farming. They talked about different tips for fertilizing the soil for different types of plants, as well as processing the harvested crops into ready-to-eat meals. He also liked videos about animal care. In other words, he loved everything about agriculture and such a simple carefree life. He was so jealous of those who made these videos. He wanted to live the same life so badly. He had dreamed about it so many times. But one day, something was different. Suddenly, everything on him disappeared, and only the strap of the transport remained in his hand. A new world was already surrounding him with a flock of dragons in the air, flying majestically by. Different air, different sky, different mountains, everything new. And then Lee realized that this was not a dream, not a vision. He was frightened and confused. How could this have happened to him? As time went on, under the guidance of the novice system, he slowly learned the basic skills of survival in this world. In fact, at first, he knew nothing about this completely different world, but it did not scare him at all. After all, this was the simple farming life he wanted so much. Lee felt his strength and health had improved compared to his life in the previous world. However, after a while, an information window appeared with the following message: "Dear player, after this period of rookie training, you have fully fulfilled the conditions necessary to leave the rookie village. Please start your adventure." But our hero was so pleased with how things were going that he wondered why he had to leave. He was so happy here. What else did he need for a happy life? Then the next message appeared, emphasizing that after he leaves the newcomer village, he will meet all kinds of people and creatures in this world. He would be able to learn a variety of sword and magic skills and perhaps become a legendary hero who could defeat the demon queen who had taken over the world. And then he was asked to start the adventure again. But the hero did not give up easily and still did not want to start the adventure. He explained that he did not want to kill any demon queen. He insisted that he just wanted to continue living here in the village of newcomers. The information windows began to bother him more and more, urging him to leave the newcomer village. They asked him to go fulfill his mission, to kill the demon king, and start his adventure. Then they began to convince him that the later he left the newbie village, the stronger the demon king would be. That learning sword and magic skills would allow the legendary hero to get treasures and all kinds of interesting encounters. Then the system simply required him to start the adventure over and over again. The system kept telling him to leave the newbie village, and it seemed that there was nothing the system could do to him, except give him messages and couldn't force him to leave. Lee decided that he could go to hell with this demon king. He just wanted to stay here and live like this forever. There is something that makes the newcomer village special. It's a special time barrier that completely hides the newbie village and keeps it safe inside. This barrier, one day, lasts much longer than 24 hours, and this allows you to do much more inside the barrier than outside it. Our hero Li Ping used this time to hone his farming skills to perfection. He gained a lot of experience and increased his physical strength. He also went hunting in the forest, where he became a master of archery and agile movement. He learned to be as quiet and invisible as a shadow. He became a master at making objects. He spent a lot of time in meditation and reflection, increasing his spiritual power. He still didn't know anything about swords and magic, but it didn't matter to him because he wasn't going on an adventure. He traded the points he got from the newbie tasks to slowly build his perfect house out of junk. This went on until one day when suddenly the barrier surrounding the village exploded, leaving one last angry message for Lee. How stupid. In this world of sword and magic, where you can do whatever you want and become whatever you want, all you do every day is farm, completely ignoring my advice. You're not a legendary hero at all. You only know how to get newbie points and exchange them for maintenance tools. You don't want to learn any skills with a sword or magic at all. You're not interested in my adventure help features at all. I hate it. I hate you. I hope you die soon by the hand of the Demon King. The system disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Our hero just exhaled a sigh of relief. He thought that finally there would be no more annoying notifications and everyone would leave him alone. After a hard day's work in the field, he felt hungry and decided to make himself dinner. But he noticed that he was running out of firewood and decided to chop some more. As he approached the log to chop the wood, he remembered that he hadn't brought his special axe with him. He had left it in the woods when he chopped wood in the morning. Suddenly, the sky was covered with clouds, and countless lightning bolts appeared. Among them, a strong wind rose. He looked up, not understanding what was happening. It was the first time he had ever seen anything like this. Frightened and confused, he said, "Not now." Elizabeth appeared from the sky, surrounded by lightning. It was a spectacular appearance. Satisfied that she had finally found this unfortunate legendary hero, she smiled to herself, hoping for fun ahead. But all her hopes were dashed in a moment, and she looked in amazement at what was happening on the ground. Our legendary hero ran as fast as he could to his house. But the reason for this was not Elizabeth, whom he did not even notice, but the clouds with rain that Lee noticed, and he was worried about his belongings and fish that were drying in the open air. Elizabeth could only guess why he was running. Is he really the legendary hero promised in the prophecies? Why is he so insignificant? Lee breathed a sigh of relief, glad to have managed to save his belongings and dried fish and sausages from the rain. His robo-dog companion, Wan Kai, was not as calm and happy as his master. He started barking at the clouds, anticipating trouble. But Lee did not understand what was happening at all. He thought his dog was afraid of the rain and thunderstorm. He began to calm him down, trying to explain to him that it was about to rain and they had to go home. But Wan Kai would not calm down, and when Lee was about to leave him here and go inside himself, the dog began to disturb him and bark at him. Then, even our stiff-necked man began to realize that something was wrong, and he finally looked up at the sky. Finally, he saw a strange silhouette against the clouds. It was strangely shaped, and Lee asked his robot dog what that thing was in the sky. The dog kept barking. Elizabeth looked at Lee as if he were a complete idiot. How could he be so stupid as to compare her to anything? As soon as Lee heard her voice, he immediately began to apologize for not seeing her clearly earlier. However, he was overwhelmed with questions that he couldn't say out loud. Why would someone out of the blue want to join? Shouldn't a village of newcomers be completely safe? Elizabeth said with a murderous look on her face, let's check it out first. She began to prepare a spell. Before Lee could even ask what she was talking about, an object was rapidly flying at him. All he could do was shield himself with his hand from imminent death. But Elizabeth was surprised that he remained alive and unharmed was promising. Instead of piercing him, the sword began to make a circle around him, and then it lay right in his hand, ready to fight. Lee was as shocked as Elizabeth. How did he do that? He immediately struck a heroic pose and swung his sword. But it was all instinctive. As soon as he realized what was happening, he immediately began to try to throw away the sword, which flew into his hand. Lee was stunned and frightened by what was happening. Elizabeth stated that the recognition of the Holy Sword Alpha could not be wrong. She had finally found the legendary hero. But something was wrong with him. His magical powers were so low that even the ordinary soldiers in her army outclassed by him. Could he be hiding his true power? This was an unanswered question. Then she introduced herself to Lee, said that her name was Elizabeth, and she was the strongest demon queen in history. Today, she would completely destroy the last legendary hero. She began to cast a spell of incredible power to destroy this pitiful hero in one attack. And then Lee, scared to death, began to ask himself why the demon queen was here. He hadn't left this place. At the same time, his faithful robo-dog started barking at the demon queen again, scared even more. Lee tried to calm him down as he thought he might provoke Elizabeth. With the help of abyss magic, the demon queen should have simply destroyed this place. 3 huge icons appeared in the sky. Huge meteors began to appear from them, about to destroy everything below. Frightened, Lee finally began to realize that perhaps the system was telling him that his meeting with the demon queen was inevitable, even if he didn't leave the newbie village. Then Lee simply threw his sword on the ground and said that he had nothing more to say here. Then he just started running to his house without even trying to do anything else. His reasoning was as follows: so I'm a rookie nub, but the final boss has come to my door. So what can I do but accept my fate? And he headed for his door without a care in the world, leaving his faithful dog, the robot, to take care of business. As he stood at the door, Lee reflected that perhaps he should even be grateful for this fate. As he entered the house, he knew he had nothing to regret. He had spent so much happy time here. In the end, he just wanted to go back to zero with this house, and he locked himself in his house, waiting for the fate that Elizabeth had in store for him. The demon queen did not understand at all what was going on. Why did he drop his weapon? Why didn't he run away? Why did he lock himself in the house? And what did his stupid smile mean? In the end, was it an ambush from him? And he was so strong that he was not afraid of her at all. These thoughts drove Elizabeth crazy. She screamed that he was an incredibly sneaky bastard. She was angrier than ever before. How could it be that someone could turn his back on her like that, with a smile on his face? She shouted, "Die," and directed the full power of her magic at this house. Giant stone meteors flew at the little house, and nothing seemed to stop them. The robot dog went into combat mode. He began to measure and calculate the strength of the attack in order to respond with enough force to repel it. The 3 giant meteors were flying very fast under the influence of gravity and pushed by the power of magic, and seemed to be blurred spots. But one Kai had completed his calculations in time and was ready to respond. Combat modules with missiles began to transform from its robotic body, and within a second, the robot was fully in combat mode. It was armed with dozens of missiles and other countermeasures to counter threats. It opened fire with all the weapons it had, and thanks to the calculations made, each of its shells hit the target. The first attack was repelled by the efforts of the robot's faithful dog. Elizabeth liked what she saw. The hero from the legends was not so helpless after all. He had such an advanced magic tool in the form of this robotic dog. It must be a legendary battle, but compared to it, this dog was absolutely nothing. And she was going to prove it in battle. She began to prepare an even more powerful spell. Again, with the help of apocalyptic magic, she was going to destroy this whole piece of the continent. She told the dog that she had lost interest in testing its capabilities and was going to end it here and now. She summoned an incredibly large meteor of pure energy. One Kai started his calculations again, and as soon as he completed them, he got ready to act. He began to generate a small black hole. One Kai enlarged it to a certain point, and then he launched it into a huge energy meteor. The Demon Queen saw his attempt, but she was sure that he would not succeed, and so the little black hole of the robot dog fell into this energy ball. Elizabeth smiled to herself, confident that they would be destroyed along with a piece of this earth. But something was wrong. Suddenly, the energy ball began to dissipate without reaching its goal, and then it disappeared without a trace, causing no harm. The Demon Queen was shocked. Her apocalyptic magic hadn't worked. How could this be? She did not understand what had happened. Her magic was broken. This had never happened before. But one more question was on her mind. What was the hero doing inside the house? She could not even imagine it. He was just lying in bed, ready to accept his death, imagining all the happy moments that had been in his life. Surprised, Elizabeth began to descend to the ground. One Kai continued to bark at her. Elizabeth looked at the robotic dog with curiosity. She wondered what kind of creature he was. One Kai was ready for a fight and had the right expression on his face. After a moment of hesitation and reflection, Elizabeth laughed. It was unexpected, but in the end, it was she who had underestimated her opponent. How ironic! She had decided to finish the job manually, without the help of magic, just using the real physical strength she had. Elizabeth spread her wings in preparation for hand-to-hand combat. As she approached the robot dog, she shouted at it not to be too proud of itself, because it had used less than 30% of its strength before. In her true, terrifying form, she came at him like a ball of death and fear. The queen was sure that she could show him what real terror was. The poor, frightened dog had no choice but to stay and fight her. A battle of incredible intensity was taking place in the yard of the small house. Meanwhile, our hero had been sleeping peacefully for an hour. He woke up and didn't quite understand what had happened. Was he dead or not? He looked around, and he was still in his house. Lee was surprised by this turn of events. He got out of bed, not believing that he had real ground under his feet. Everything seemed so normal, except for one thing. There was an extraordinary silence outside the house. Lee decided to check it out. He went to the door, grabbed the handle, and froze. A crazy thought froze his movements. What if this demon queen was waiting for him outside the door like a maniac? He cautiously peered out of the door with fear. Before him was a battlefield, a battle that had just ended. Clouds of dust were everywhere, but they were already beginning to clear. As the dust settled, Lee saw Elizabeth holding a mangled One Kai. Her claws were crushing his limp head. Lee only managed to shout the name of his faithful friend while the demon queen finally broke the robot dog. Then Elizabeth threw away the broken robot and went to Lee with mock regret. She told him how sorry she was that she had completely destroyed his magical tool, which he was so proud of. As always, the frightened Lee tried to reassure her, assuring her that it was nothing to worry about, that she had broken his robot. He asked her to calm down and sit down to talk. Elizabeth was very tired and angrily told him that, of course, they would sit down to talk, but only after she had killed him. Elizabeth couldn't believe it. Was that really it? She was already at the end of her rope and could barely hold on. She was shaking with tension and exhaustion. Was this really the end for her that was foretold in the prophecy? What a humiliation to lose to such a worthless hero who did not even come out to fight her. And without taking a few steps, she fell down, exhausted. The seemingly impossible had happened. The invincible demon queen, who had held the entire continent of heroes in her steel grip, now lay helpless and defeated on a lone bed in the middle of a village of newcomers. It seemed like an ignominious end, but Lee overcame his fear and curiously asked Elizabeth what had happened to her. He could not even imagine the trouble he had escaped. He went to her and gently and carefully lifted her by the shoulders. Lee asked if she was alive while holding her. However, he never received an answer. Something unusual began to happen to Elizabeth. Her demonic horns and wings began to disappear and melt away as if they had never been there. And since all her armor was demonic armor supported by her power, it also began to disappear. He did not understand what she was trying to do or whether she was doing it on purpose. Her clothes were steadily disappearing, and when there was nothing left, it was quite a sight. It made Lee lose his temper and a good half a liter of blood, but in the end, he tamed himself. After all, night was coming, and on the continent of heroes, nights are dangerous and cold, and it is better to spend them inside the house than outside. Morning came, and the clock was already showing 9:30 in the morning, and Elizabeth was still in bed. Although Lee was not the smartest guy in the village, he still thought of putting shackles on his unexpected guest to protect himself from unexpected events. Elizabeth finally woke up, and her surprise knew no bounds. Why is she still alive? She was a demon queen who had kept the whole world in fear and had never known defeat before. And now she was experiencing a humiliating and painful defeat, the first one in her life. She wondered why, instead of using the opportunity to kill her, he had imprisoned her. Why did he do it? To show his power to the whole world? Or did he have other motives? She was completely confused and no longer understood this strange hero. But she had to do something about it. She began to gather her strength to break the shackles. She gathered all the strength she had left for a decisive breakthrough, and nothing, absolutely nothing happened. The shackles remained on her hands. She looked at them sadly. They were an artifact of a legendary class that she had never seen before. She was disappointed with everything that had happened to her. Damn it, she had underestimated him. How much power he was hiding, and how much more he had. If only she knew. She began to look around the room that surrounded her. It was filled with objects she had never seen before. A chest, a knight, a Pokémon, a deck of cards. She continued to think that these strange things could not be simple. It seemed that this hero was much more evil and dangerous than she had imagined. She had underestimated him very much. Immersed in her thoughts, she did not notice how time passed. Lee came in the door with a sweet smile, trying to show his peaceful intentions. He asked Elizabeth if she was awake yet. He had a plan. Elizabeth was very wary. She met him, assuring him that if he wanted to kill her, he should not expect her to beg for mercy. At the same time, Lee was thinking that the Demon Queen is really scary, but this is his only chance for survival. He just had to use it. Lee asked her if she would rather talk instead of killing. Then he noticed the shackles on her hands, offering her food. He justified why he had shackled her, only as a precautionary measure because she looked so scary, and he could not help himself. Then he would justify himself because she might have misunderstood him and he didn't mean it, and she was not scary at all, but formidable looking. Elizabeth had no idea what he was talking about. She just looked at him questioningly, confused. Lee assured her that it was a misunderstanding between them. He would unlock the shackles for her right away, and they could talk calmly and without tension. Meanwhile, from Elizabeth's perspective, things looked like this. She thought Lee was cunning and insidious. He pretended to be sorry for the misunderstanding at the beginning, and he thought it was funny that she thought she could be worthy of challenging a hero. She felt that if she wanted to survive, she had to do everything he told her. Otherwise, he would destroy her. She looked at him, wondering how he could dare to threaten the Demon Queen. Lee went over and unlocked her shackles. He hoped that by unlocking her shackles, he had proved that he had no bad or sick intentions. Elizabeth thought to herself that this situation was very unfavorable for her. However, strong personalities know when to obey and when to stand their ground. She decided to obey him now, but she planned to make him pay and regret his arrogance later. Lee didn't understand what was happening, so he simply told her to rest and went to the corner of the room, scared. Having time to think, Lee reasoned that everyone would probably wonder why he didn't kill the demon queen when she was unconscious. After all, in this world of swords and magic, it is completely normal for her, as a demon queen, to have the possibility of resurrection. Killing chickens and fish for soup is one thing, but how could he kill a person? However, in his mind, resolving the conflict between the hero and the demon queen doesn't necessarily require a battle and killing. As long as she cannot pose any threat to him and will become a friend to her, they can continue to live happily ever after. Distracted, he began to get visibly excited about his plans, which Elizabeth interpreted as another mockery of her. Lee noticed the mangled remains of his faithful friend on the table. He sadly told him what a mess he had become. Elizabeth was still sitting on the bed, trying to act as submissive as she could. When she saw Lee holding his mutilated robot, she asked him if it was his strongest magical weapon. She expected that it was his strongest and that the fact that she had destroyed it would not allow him to create a new one. She should just wait for the right moment to take revenge. Lee replied that it wasn't really a magic tool. It was just a small thing he made when he lived here. He made it just because he was bored, and he made it recently. Elizabeth heard what she wanted and understood everything in her own way. She had already started dreaming about what she would do with this hero. He will dream of death, but it will be an unfulfilled dream for him. This time he will be the one who will be helpless without his magic tricks. She, on the other hand, without handcuffs, can use the magic of the abyss to quickly regain her lost strength. Now she thought that he had lost the protection of his strongest magical tool. It was just like losing his right arm. The balance of power was now on her side. Elizabeth was about to start her plan, but she only said out loud that she was sorry for the things she had broken. Lee did not even turn to her and did not see what was happening behind him. He was carelessly removing the memory card from one Kai. He assured Elizabeth that everything was fine and that it was not a big deal that she had broken his robot because the memory card had survived. Elizabeth decided that this was the best moment to destroy this legendary hero. She had already started to gather forces for the attack. Lee unsuspectingly said that the body could be repaired, and he quickly opened a drawer with 6 brand new disabled robots that he had made before. So she shouldn't worry. He had everything under control, and he smiled, glad that he hadn't upset his guest as much as he thought he had. Shocked and disappointed, Elizabeth didn't understand how this was possible. She had barely managed to defeat 1 robot, and now there were 6 more. It made her feel like giving up. Lee, meanwhile, took one of the robots off the shelf without noticing anything. He inserted a memory card and turned it on. One Kai came back to life. Lee began to tell Elizabeth that it was fun to have a companion. However, he is sometimes naughty, so he usually only turns him on at home. Meanwhile, One Kai was happy to be back and jumped around his owner. From Elizabeth's point of view, Lee's carefree conversation was full of mockery and threats, and this angry robot did not give her peace of mind. She sat down powerlessly on the bed. It just couldn't be. Elizabeth was scared and didn't know what to do. All her previous plans had been destroyed. There was no way she could defeat so many of these robots. She was in despair. Then a smell came to her, an incredible smell. She had never smelled anything like it before. She put aside and forgot all her sad thoughts and asked Lee what it was. As a demon, she was used to the smell of smoke, blood, death, and corpses, but this smell was new and pleasant to her. Lee said that when she fainted, he decided to cook her some food to warm her up. He thought she would definitely be hungry, so he decided to be proactive. He put a bowl of plain porridge with meat and plain dumplings in front of her. They looked very good and smelled very good too. Elizabeth looked at the food and said that only weaklings need food to exist. She had long ago reached a transcendental state where she no longer needed such things as food. However, the sight and smell of the food Lee had prepared for her left her no chance. She began to realize that she could not resist this overwhelming desire. Elizabeth could no longer look away. All her attention was focused on the food. She began to swallow her drool. She could not resist, and now her stomach began to growl. She was ashamed of her weakness before her sworn enemy. She asked herself how she could have stooped so low. Lee was sure that resolving conflicts with delicious food was going to work. He said that he had prepared it all from vegetables and grains that he had grown himself, all completely natural. He invited Elizabeth to try it. She took the fork with distrust and reached for the tempting dumplings, not knowing what awaited her. Was this food poisoned or not? Elizabeth had her doubts. She finally made up her mind and brought the first dumpling to her lips. She took the first bite, but she didn't make a face. Then another one. There was absolutely nothing on her face. It was not at all clear whether she liked it or not. Lee was confident in his cooking skills and the food he had prepared, but he wondered if it would be enough for a demon queen of her status. Would she appreciate a Rocky Village level meal? He was very worried about whether she would like it. Although Elizabeth did not show any emotion, the fork spoke for her, and the dumplings disappeared from the plate one by one. Then she put the last dumpling in her mouth, and she beamed with pleasure with every bite. The juicy meat-filled explosion was like fireworks in her mouth. The natural and tasty ingredients from which the dumplings were made also had a high concentration of magical energy. She could feel it. Elizabeth began to realize that, in fact, there are many pleasant things in this world. It is so delicious that even she, the demon queen, cannot endure and not swallow this last bite. Incredible feelings of pleasure and bliss filled her, and she could not delay this moment any longer. She swallowed the last bite, but something was wrong. She felt it immediately. What was it? A burning and searing sensation filled her after the last piece of dumpling. Tears began to appear in her eyes. Even her heart felt it and began to beat incredibly fast. It was as if a volcano of flavor and fire had exploded inside her. She could not hold back her exclamation. The dumplings were so spicy that she could not bear it, but they were so delicious, and at first, she did not feel the bitterness at all. But then the fire was scorching like hell. Barely able to hold herself together, Elizabeth asked what he had put in her food. Lee was shocked. He said that he had added a little chili to his own taste. Doesn't she, the demon queen, like spicy food? Elizabeth could hardly breathe and realized that he did not have good intentions. This evil hero had imprisoned her only to conduct his sick experiments. However, Lee had his own view of the events and a ready-made solution to the problem. He told her he had a solution. Let her just try his specialty porridge with a smile. He first told her about the composition of the porridge. He added eggs and lean pork to it. Lee was sure that the porridge would reduce the heat and calm the fire in her mouth. Elizabeth looked at him with distrust and anger. What a cunning scoundrel he is, first feeding her poison with one hand and then offering her the antidote with the other. She thought he was playing with her like an experimental doll with one palm. There is no sane explanation for this. It was all very strange. She felt very uncomfortable, but she couldn't ignore the fire burning in her mouth. She picked up a spoon and scooped up some porridge. She brought it to her mouth to savor the flavor before tasting it, and finally, she tasted it. She didn't even realize what she was feeling at first. However, in a moment, she was already in seventh heaven with happiness. This incredible contrast of flavor filled her, tore her apart, and then put her back together again. It was incredible. She felt as if she were a shining angel. Tears of happiness and pleasure began to drip from her eyes, eyes that had never cried before. It was so beautiful. These feelings filled her so much that she felt so peaceful and cozy. Endless comfort filled her. She could not and did not want to stop on this path. These feelings completely changed her. Every molecule of her body and mind now the task of world domination and enslavement of everyone. The struggle between the demon queen and the hero. All this no longer made any sense to her and did not bother her at all. It seemed that all her problems, suffering, anger, and hatred were disappearing. She was letting go of all that negative stuff and was going to live a carefree life. But it was all because she realized how insignificant she is, like a grain of sand on a huge beach, how small she was compared to the universe she had discovered. Elizabeth sat there, filled with wisdom and knowledge. She was now a demon queen of a whole new level. Unbelievably, she had entered a new dimension through the consumption of food. Under the influence of two extreme stimuli, her powers had increased several times. She could feel it. Elizabeth sat on the bed and looked at Lee carefully. She told him not to pretend and asked him what he really wanted. She had a lot of suspicions about him. Lee asked her simply and with a smile what she thought. Would they be able to conduct an experiment together to find out if it was possible for a hero and a demon queen to coexist peacefully? On Elizabeth's part, she thought that she had realized his true intentions. He is a sick, evil hero. He threatens her that she is the only one in this world worthy of being the object of his research. He will help her become stronger, so that she can defeat him. She thought that he was going to play with her like an experimental doll. Lee did not understand what was happening to her expression. He asked if she would mind if he continued to cook her delicious meals. Elizabeth was furious. She thought it was better to die than to be ashamed. She was the queen of demons. She could not allow this. How dare he mock her and tell her that he would help her become stronger if she wanted to, and then wait for her to try to defeat him? What a sick maniac. However, having overcome all her fantasies, she calmly exhaled and said to him out loud, "Forget it." Lee did not understand what had happened. Was she still going to kill him? He was scared. Everything was not going exactly according to plan. He stood there, not knowing what was happening, and Elizabeth started to get up on the bed, which raised even more questions. Then she stood up on the bed and looked down at him and said, "Listen to me," as if he had any other choice. She told him that she could agree to his terms, but he should know that she was not doing this out of fear, but out of a desire to reach the pinnacle of power. Lee was completely lost in what was happening. He wondered why she should be afraid of him. But she was the demon queen. She had the power to do whatever she wanted. Something was wrong here, and he didn't understand what it was. Lee wondered how he could understand this strange creature. Elizabeth continued to rage and assure him not to think that she would bow her head and be submissive to him while living here. Her honor as the queen of demons must never be humiliated. With a frightening expression on her face, she continued to warn him that if he disobeyed her, she would make him pay and destroy him, even if she had to sacrifice everything to do so. Lee just gave up in his futile attempts to understand everything. He said that he understood everything. He just wants to try to get along with her. But the look in Elizabeth's eyes made it clear that she did not believe him and was not going to trust him. She began to shout at him that if he wanted to explore, he should feel free to come and try. Poor Lee could only throw his hands up and surrender. Elizabeth added that if there was anything else delicious, she wanted it all. The weak Lee simply replied that he was a slave and understood. The legendary Alpha sword was simply abandoned and stuck out of the firewood log. What a spineless hero he turned out to be, this time. So a year passed. Lee chopped wood with the legendary sword, log after log. He had already chopped quite a pile. Meanwhile, he was thinking, what should he do? Things had become quite complicated over the past year. Lee remembered that since the demon queen had violently entered the newcomer village, she had broken the village's protective barrier. Therefore, time here gradually synchronized with the outside world. Time synchronization is not the problem. The problem is that, without the protection of the barrier, the beginner's village lost its main function altogether. It was now completely open and vulnerable to the wildness that surrounded it, and monsters he had never seen before began to appear nearby. Lee continued to chop wood and piling them up. He continued to think. There were advantages to having a demon queen in his house. It kept the monsters away. But the question remained, what would happen when she left? How would he survive then? He was interrupted by Elizabeth's shout from her room, emphasizing that it was lunchtime. Why wasn't he ready yet? Lee quickly replied that he was on his way and would be ready in a minute. What a life for a hero! Lee realized that he had no choice. Elizabeth's presence was the key to his safety, so he had to keep her as long as possible. However, over the year, Elizabeth had changed a bit, and there was a reason for that. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was lying on the couch in front of the TV, eating her sixth bag of chips in a row. She was completely out of shape. The delicious food and the TV had done their job, and together they had defeated more heroes in all worlds and dimensions than Elizabeth could have imagined. Covered in crumbs, Elizabeth did not stop. She didn't quite like the shows on TV, so she asked Lee if he could connect her to a new channel. Lee was just carrying the finished dish from the kitchen. Dinner was almost ready. He replied that, after the system went down, only this channel was working, and there was nothing he could do about it. Lunch was almost ready. Dissatisfied, Elizabeth began to get up from the couch, which began to creak under her considerable weight. She asked Lee to wait for her, but instead of getting to her feet, she began to prepare a spell. Small demonic wings began to form in flashes of pink fire, and then they attached themselves to Elizabeth's back. Instead of going to the kitchen, she simply conjured up the wings and used them to fly to the table and continue eating her chips as she flew by. Lee? She asked what kind of poison these potato chips were. It seems to her that the more she eats them, the lazier she becomes. She thought that, under the guise of delicious food, he was feeding her poison to make her weak. Lee just tiredly told her that potato chips are very high in calories, and, together with the other food she eats too much of, they make her fat. He was so tired. First he chopped wood all morning, then he ran right away to make dinner. Elizabeth asked him again, "Fat, what is fat?" She began to look at her swollen tummy, then she began to check it with her hand. Indeed, the folds were quite large, but she already knew the solution. She started the spell again, and, under the influence of her magic, she began to lose the fat she had accumulated over the past year. Lee just watched in amazement from the sidelines. She was magically able to turn all the fat from a negative attribute into an incredible amount of magical power that was now overwhelming her. Elizabeth acted as if nothing had happened. She simply told Lee that she had turned all the fat into magical power. Lee's eyes just went square. She could use her magic after all. They sat down to lunch together. Elizabeth was very pleased, and she asked Lee how he felt about her dispelling another one of his tricks. Lee already knew what to say, so he just agreed with everything, laughed, and invited her to start the meal. Elizabeth was very happy. She liked what she saw on the table. She adored the dishes that Lee prepared, and she thankfully said Lee that today's dinner is incredible, and she began to devour everything on the table with incredible speed. Lee only had time to ask her to take her time. He tiredly said that if she didn't have enough, he would just cook more. Lunch is not a competition to see who can eat the most, and he thought how tiring it was living with an insatiable devil. Elizabeth saw things differently and wondered what he meant when he asked her to eat more slowly. It seemed to her that he was mocking her, as if she were a pig not eating fast enough and slowly gaining strength for the upcoming battle with him. While Lee was about to bring dessert, she slammed the table with indignation. She shouted that enough is enough. She is fed up with this ridicule. She will not tolerate him treating her like a pig. She had already planned to fight him 10 times this year, but this time she was serious. She was full of energy now, and was going to fight to the death. But Lee pulled out a dessert from the fridge, strawberry pudding, Elizabeth's favorite dessert, and she forgot about all the anger she had a moment ago. This perfect pudding was all that mattered to her now, and she agreed to postpone their fight until later. She told Lee to give the pudding to her as soon as possible. Lee thought that luckily this demon was easy to take care of. As long as he cooks her a delicious meal, he can calm her down at any time. This was definitely a plus for him. Meanwhile, somewhere far away from the hero's house, a battle was taking place. An old warrior and a girl were running away from several ghosts that were chasing them. The ghosts were wearing masks and hooded cloaks. They were catching up with their victims. One of them jumped on the old warrior first. He set a spell. Black lightning flew at the fugitives, and when they had almost caught up with them, the ghost said something else and stuck his hand into the black lightning rift. A cage of black lightning surrounded the fugitives. They could no longer run away. Here they had to accept their possibly last battle with these ghosts.